Life moves at a silver velocity, a blur of light and sound that requires a steady hand to navigate and a brave heart to survive. We capture the high-speed moments that define our era in stunning high definition. Hit subscribe now and keep up with the pace of the future.
I never expected the woman standing quietly by the coat check to own the building they were celebrating in. My brother-in-law raised his champagne glass and said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, that I'd always been the cautionary tale in the family. The sister-in-law who couldn't hold a job, couldn't hold a relationship, couldn't hold anything together for more than 18 months before it all fell apart. People laughed. Not unkindly, some of them. Just the way people laugh when something has been said so many times it stops feeling cruel and starts feeling like fact. I smiled and sipped my water. If only he knew whose name was on the lease. Let me take you back 5 years because none of this makes sense without the beginning. And the beginning for me was a Tuesday morning in October when my sister called to tell me I was being removed from the board of the company I had helped build from a single spreadsheet and a second-hand laptop in our parents' garage. She didn't say it like that, of course. She said it gently in the careful voice she used when she was about to do something she'd already decided to do and just needed you to cooperate. She said the investors felt the company needed a more unified vision going forward. She said my role had always been more creative than operational. She said she hoped I understood. What she meant was, we don't need you anymore, and we'd prefer you disappear quietly. I'd spent 4 years building Callaway Home, a boutique interior design and staging firm that had grown from a side project into something that served clients across 3 states. I sourced the vendors. I built the client relationships. I trained the staff. My sister, who had a head for contracts and a gift for making wealthy people feel understood, had handled the business development side. We were supposed to be equal partners. The day she told me I was out, she was wearing the blazer I had given her for her birthday. I remember noticing that detail and not knowing what to do with it. I didn't argue. I had learned by then that arguing with her was like pushing against a wall that could smile back at you. She had already spoken to the investors. She had already spoken to our mother. The decision was made. What remained was only the performance of my acceptance. So I nodded. I said I understood. I collected the personal items from my desk, which my assistant had already been asked to box up, and I walked out of the office on Maple Street that I had signed the lease for, past the reception desk where the orchid I had chosen was still blooming. And I stood on the sidewalk in the October cold and thought, very clearly, they think this is the end. It wasn't. The months after were the kind that don't make good stories while you're living them. There's no montage, no triumphant music. There's just the relentless smallness of starting over. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in the neighborhood I could afford, not one I would have chosen. I took consulting work wherever I could find it. Staging houses for local realtors, helping small businesses with their visual branding, anything that used the skills I had without requiring me to explain what had happened at Callaway Home. I told people I'd decided to go independent. Most of them believed me. The ones who knew my sister well enough to know the real story believed her version instead. She had been careful with the narrative. In her telling, I had struggled with the operational demands. I had been resistant to growth. I had made it difficult for the company to scale. None of it was technically false in the way that a lie is false, but none of it was true in the way that matters. She had taken the shape of what happened and turned it inside out, and by the time I heard the story coming back to me through mutual contacts, I barely recognized myself in it. That's a particular kind of damage, the kind that makes you doubt your own memory. I spent a lot of those early months very quiet, not healing exactly, more like going still the way you go, still when you're trying to figure out where the ground is. And then I met a woman named Petra Lowell at a professional development event I almost didn't attend. She was sitting at a high-top table near the back of the room, drinking black coffee and reading what turned out to be a REIT quarterly report, and when I sat down across from her, she looked up and said, without preamble, "You look like someone who just got pushed out of something." I laughed. I hadn't laughed like that in months. The short, involuntary kind that means something actually landed. She was a commercial real estate investor, she told me. She had started in residential staging of all things years ago, before she pivoted toward acquisition. She had done exactly what I had done, built something from nothing, found a partner who eventually swallowed her whole, and she had come out the other side richer and considerably less surprised by human nature. We talked for 3 hours. By the end of the night, she had given me her card and said, "If you want to learn how money actually moves, call me." I called her the next morning. What Petra taught me over the next 2 years is difficult to summarize because it wasn't a single lesson. It was more like a complete reorientation. I had spent years thinking about design as the product and business as the vehicle. She showed me that the asset was the thing, the physical property, the equity, the position, and that everything else, all the beautiful staging in client relationships and creative vision, was just the surface of something much more structural underneath. I started small. I used what little I had saved. Money I had kept in an account my sister didn't know about because I had always had a cautious streak that I used to be embarrassed by and had learned to treat as an instinct. I put it into a limited partnership Petra had structured, a small mixed-use development in a mid-sized city 2 hours from where I lived. It was not glamorous. Nothing about those years was glamorous. I drove 2 hours each way to walk properties. I read loan documents until my eyes blurred. I learned the difference between a cap rate and an IRR in the way you learn things when money is attached to getting it wrong. But the numbers started to work. The first return was modest, enough to reinvest, not enough to live differently. The second was better. By the third year, I had structured my own LLC, Harlow Capital, which I named after the street where I had lived as a kid. By the fourth year, Harlow Capital had quietly acquired stakes in 4 properties across 2 states, including a boutique hotel in Asheville, North Carolina, that had been underperforming under its previous management and was, with a few well-considered changes, on its way to becoming one of the top-rated small hotels in the Southeast. And one of those properties, acquired through a subsidiary that no one in my family had any reason to connect to me, was the event venue where my sister was now hosting the 5-year anniversary gala for Callaway Home. I had not planned it that way. That part was genuinely accidental, which made it, in its own way, more satisfying than anything I could have arranged. I had known about the gala for 6 weeks. My mother had mentioned it on the phone, carefully, in the way she mentioned things she wasn't sure I should know about. She said my sister had rented out the Harrington house for the evening. She said it was going to be beautiful. She said she hoped I was doing well. I had pulled up the reservation in my property management system that night. Callaway Home, full venue buyout, catering minimum, 4-hour event block. I sat with that information for a long time. I had not been invited. My mother mentioned that too, also carefully. She said my sister had felt it would be complicated, given the history. She said she hoped I understood. I told her I understood completely. Then I called my property manager at Harrington House and told her I would be attending as a silent owner, doing a routine walkthrough, and that she did not need to announce me. I almost didn't go. The night before, I sat in my apartment and thought about all the reasons it was a bad idea. It was self-indulgent. It might look like I couldn't let go. It served no practical purpose and created unnecessary risk of a scene. I told myself all of this very sensibly, and then I put on the dress I had bought in Nashville the previous spring, and I went. The drive took 40 minutes. The venue, which had been a private estate before I acquired it and converted it for events, sat back from the road behind a long gravel drive lined with oak trees that were, that evening in late September, just beginning to turn. The windows were lit from inside. I could hear music when I stepped out of the car. My property manager met me at the side entrance, a composed woman named Gwen who had been running events there for 3 years and who greeted me with the particular professionalism of someone who understood the situation without needing it explained. "They're in the main hall in the East Terrace," she said quietly. "About 80 guests. Your sister has been asking about the parking situation." "Let her know we have it handled," I said. I walked in through the kitchen corridor past the catering staff and emerged into the north sitting room, which was just off the main hall. From there I could see the event without being immediately visible. Long tables with white linens, floral arrangements that my sister had clearly chosen herself. She had always had good taste. Servers moving through the crowd. The kind of warm, golden light that makes everyone look like the best version of themselves. And there she was, at the center of it, in a green dress I had never seen, holding a glass of champagne and accepting congratulations with the particular grace of someone who has always known they deserved this. Standing next to her was her husband. I had met him 4 times over the years. He was in finance, something in wealth management, and he had the quality some men in that field develop of being simultaneously impressive and slightly dismissive of anyone he didn't need to impress. He had always been pleasant enough to me the way you are pleasant to someone you have categorized as unimportant. At my nephew's birthday party 2 years prior, he had made a joke about my little projects, and I had smiled and changed the subject, and later that night I had gone home and looked at my portfolio numbers and felt something settle in me like ballast. I watched him now, working the room, hand on shoulders, easy laugh. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Petra, closing confirmed. Congratulations, you're now majority stakeholder in Asheville and the Charleston property. Full picture attached. I looked at the numbers. I looked back at the room. I found a glass of sparkling water and walked in. My mother saw me first. She was near the bar, talking to one of my sister's clients, and when she spotted me, her expression moved through 3 different things in about a second: surprise, alarm, and then a careful social neutrality. "Sweetheart," she said, and I could hear the question underneath it. "Hey, Mom." I kissed her cheek. "You look beautiful." "What are you doing here?" "I was in the area," I said, "and I have a stake in this building." She didn't quite know what to do with that. Before she could answer, I heard my sister's voice behind me. "How did you even get in here?" I turned around. She was holding her champagne glass with both hands the way people do when they're trying to look calm. Her husband was 2 steps behind her, reading the room with the professional attention of someone calculating how much this might cost. "I own the venue," I said. Simply, no particular emphasis, the way you'd say it to someone asking for directions. She laughed. It was not a happy laugh. "What are you talking about?" "Harlow Capital acquired Harrington House 14 months ago." I took a sip of my water. "I've been meaning to tell you. I just didn't have the right occasion." The silence that followed lasted maybe 4 seconds. In a crowded room, that's long enough for the people nearest to you to stop their conversations. Her husband was the first one to recover. That's not how these things work," he said. "You can't just—" "I can show you the deed of trust if you'd like," I said. "Gwen keeps a copy at the front desk." He looked at my sister. She looked at me. And for the first time in years, I saw something behind her eyes that wasn't confidence. It wasn't contrition either. That would have been too much to hope for. And honestly, not what I was after. It was simply the slow, visible adjustment of someone recalculating. She had spent 5 years telling people, and probably herself, a story in which I was the lesser one. The one who couldn't handle pressure. The one who needed to be managed rather than worked alongside. And now she was standing in a building I owned, at a party she had paid to host here, and the ground underneath that story had just shifted. I didn't need to say anything more. I almost didn't. But then her husband made a sound, half laugh, half something I can only describe as contempt. The last defense of a man who is used to being the one who explains things to people, and he said, "I'm sorry. Are we supposed to be impressed? You bought a party venue. Callaway Home just closed a deal with 3 hotel groups. You're not exactly playing in the same league." I let that sit for a moment. "You're right," I said. "I'm not playing in the same league." I paused. "I'm in the league that just acquired a 40% stake in the Wexford Hotel Group." He blinked. "That would be one of those hotel groups," I said. The silence this time was different. My sister's hand dropped slightly. Someone nearby who had been pretending not to listen stopped pretending. I had not planned to say it tonight. The Wexford acquisition had closed the previous week, and I had intended to let the news surface on its own, through industry channels. But standing there in that specific room with those specific people, I found that I wanted it said clearly, to faces I recognized, in a place they could not walk away from without acknowledging what they had just heard. I didn't stay long after that. There was a moment where I thought my sister might want to speak to me privately, and I gave her that opening. I moved to the east terrace, near the railing where the garden lights reflected off the low pond, and stood there for a few minutes. She came out about 5 minutes later without her husband. She looked, I thought, tired. Not the performance of tiredness, but the real kind. "You came here for this," she said. "I came here for a walkthrough," I said. "The rest happened." She shook her head slowly. "I know you're angry. I know what I did wasn't." She stopped. Started again. "I made a decision that was best for the company." "You made a decision that was best for you," I said, not harshly, just accurately. She didn't argue that. We stood there for a while looking at the garden. The music from inside drifted out. Someone was giving a toast. I could hear her name being said warmly, gratefully, by people who loved what she had built. And she had built something. I wasn't going to take that away from her. She had taken what we had started together and she had grown it and shaped it into something real. That part was true. What was also true was that she had done it by first removing me from the equation, and that she had told a story about me for 5 years that I had spent 5 years quietly disproving. "I'm not angry," I said, and when I said it I realized with some surprise that I meant it. I was, for a long time, but I'd been too busy building something to hold on to it. She looked at me then, really looked at me, the way you look at someone when you're trying to see something you might have missed. "The Wexford Group," she said quietly. That's significant." "I know." A long pause. "Did you know we had the deal on the table?" she asked. "I found out 2 weeks ago," I said, "after the LOI was signed." "And you still—" "It was a good acquisition," I said. "For Harlow, I mean. The Wexford portfolio made sense regardless of who else was in the room." She was quiet for a moment. Then, in a voice I hadn't heard from her in years, stripped of the professional coding, the careful management, she said, "I think I made a mistake." I didn't answer right away. I had waited a long time to hear something like that, and now that it was here it felt less like vindication and more like a door finally opening in a house I'd already moved out of. "Yeah," I said eventually, "you did." "Is there—" She stopped, started again. "Is there a version of this where we figure out how to work together?" I didn't have an answer for her that night. I told her so. I told her I needed time to think about what I actually wanted from the next chapter, now that the one I had spent 5 years writing was finally finished. I told her that the anger being gone didn't mean the hurt was, and that I was still working out what came after. She nodded. She didn't push. When I went back inside to say goodnight to my mother, Gwen appeared at my elbow and murmured, "The check from tonight's event settled this morning. Clean booking." "Thank you," I said. "Anything else you need?" I looked around the room one more time. The flowers, the light, the people in good dresses celebrating a real thing that my sister had built on a foundation that was partly mine, whether she acknowledged it or not. The table where my brother-in-law was now in a slightly too intense conversation with someone I didn't recognize, probably trying to figure out what he'd missed. "No," I said, "I think I have everything I need." I drove home with the windows down, even though it was cool enough that I probably shouldn't have. The leaves on the roadside caught the headlights as I passed. I had a voicemail from Petra that I'd listened to in the morning. I had a meeting scheduled for Thursday about the Charleston property. I had more work ahead of me than behind me, which was not a complaint. 5 years ago I stood on a sidewalk in October with a cardboard box and the conviction that my story wasn't over. I had been right about that. What I hadn't anticipated was that getting to the part where I could prove it would matter so much less than I had expected, and that what would stay with me, driving home through the dark with the cool air coming in and the radio on low, wasn't the look on my brother-in-law's face or even the quiet crack in my sister's voice when she said she thought she'd made a mistake. What would stay with me was that I had built something. Not for them, not to prove anything to anyone who had written me off or told a story at my expense or raised a glass to a version of success that deliberately left me out. For myself. Because when they took away the thing I thought I was, I had to find out what I actually was underneath it. The answer turned out to be more than enough. The thing nobody tells you about being pushed out is how long the silence after it lasts. Not the silence from other people. Though that comes too, and it's its own kind of cold. But the silence inside yourself. That hollow place where your certainty used to live. I remember standing on the sidewalk outside the office I had leased, holding a box of things that had once meant I belonged somewhere, and I couldn't tell you whether what I felt was grief or rage or just the strange stillness of a person who has just had the floor removed. What I know now, 5 years out, is that the silence was not emptiness, it was space. Space I had never had before because I had spent 4 years inside a structure someone else was quietly dismantling around me. My sister made a choice that she believed was practical. She looked at what we had built together and decided she could carry it better alone, or at least carry it in a direction I would have resisted. I don't think she woke up one morning and decided to be cruel. I think she convinced herself that what she was doing was reasonable, and that the story she told about me afterward was just the version of events she needed to believe in order to sleep at night. That's the particular dishonesty of people who are otherwise decent. They don't lie outright. They just reshape the truth into something more comfortable, and then they live inside that shape until it feels real. What I had to do was not let her version of me become my version of me. That's harder than it sounds. When the people closest to you, the ones who know you, who have eaten at your table and borrowed your ideas and stood next to you while you built something, when they tell a story in which you are the weak one, the unstable one, the one who needed to be managed, something in you wants to believe them because they knew you, so maybe they saw something true. The thing that saved me wasn't confidence. I didn't have a lot of that in those early months. What I had was stubbornness and a woman named Petra who handed me a card and said, without ceremony, that she could show me how money actually moved. And I had enough sense, or maybe just enough desperation, to call her the next morning. Petra didn't give me a philosophy. She gave me a framework and a lot of hard questions and the particular gift of treating me as someone capable of learning difficult things. That kind of respect, offered at the right moment, can reorient a person more completely than any amount of encouragement. She didn't tell me I was capable. She just acted as if I was and then waited to see what I'd do with it. What I did was study. I made mistakes. I drove 2 hours each way to walk properties I wasn't sure I could afford. I read documents until I understood them. I built something slowly, carefully, without announcing it, because I had learned that announcing things before they're solid is a form of performance, and I was done performing for people who had already decided what I was. The night I stood in my own venue and watched my brother-in-law realize what he'd missed, I want to be honest about this, I felt something, not triumph exactly, more like the peculiar satisfaction of a thing being completed, a sentence finally reaching its period. But what I felt driving home was different, quieter, more mine. I had not set out to build something in order to prove anyone wrong. I had set out to build something because, once they took away the version of me that existed in their story, I had to find out what was actually there. And what was there turned out to be more disciplined, more patient, more capable of sitting with uncertainty and continuing anyway than I had known before they forced me to find out. That's the part I didn't expect. Not the properties or the portfolio or the look on his face when the numbers landed. The part I didn't expect was learning that I was someone who could be completely dismantled and then, quietly, without anyone watching, put herself back together into something more true. That's worth more than any of the rest of it.